D&D is typically a game of sword and sorcery, high fantasy with limited technology, imitating, for the most part, medieval or primeval times. But, guns are cool, man. Bang bang, hard to hate it. The topic of guns in Dungeons & Dragons is a highly contested one. So today we want to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Do guns belong in Dungeons & Dragons? Let us know. In the Dresden books, they had a thing where magic and technology doesn't quite mix. So, the more modern the tech, the more unreliable it is around magic. That's a pretty solid way to explain their absence. Such as, why use a gun if a wizard just, being around can kind of fuck it up? Better stick to old, reliable crossbows. It would lead to a funny disconnect where soldiers and adventurers could be using longbows, while humble hunters walk around with a .50 caliber rifle. Use the Renaissance ones from the Dungeon Master's Guide. Make them pricey so players can't exploit the guns too much. Us D&D players can never really get enough. Whether you play 3 times a week or once a month, part of you always craves more. We get our fix however we can, by watching short stories online, D&D live streams, Baldur's Gate. Well, allow me to offer you something new. The best available follows a party of new adventurers trying to make a name for themselves in hopes of being sponsored in a competition. Waterdeep's Festival of Heroes, which sees the chosen parties delving into the depths of Under Mountain, risking life and limb to suppress the evils and monsters below to protect the city above. The Dungeon of the Mad Mage is filled with danger, treasure, glory, and mysteries yet to be revealed. Come watch the journey from humble beginnings into heroic legend as we adapt a campaign years in the making into an illustrated web series with art from Doodle Poodle, author of Tales from the Tables. We pride ourselves in converting hours-long sessions into smoothly paced episode with limited animation, music, blood, sweat, and tears. Get in on the ground floor of something great and join the Forever DMs table today. Link in the description. Magic guns! No, seriously, what about something like a standard gun shape with some kind of magic item that releases the Thunder Wave spell, which pushes items when triggered, like a gun. Make the barrel shape the blast so that anything that you put in forcefully comes out like a bullet. As an added effect, gunshots are as loud as thunderclaps. Now personally, I would stick with early firearms like the handgun, aka hand cannon, for pseudo-European 14th century or Arabic settings, and handguns and fire lances for Asian, specifically Chinese-themed settings of the same era. Later Asian eras, like something from Princess Mononoke, for example, would have handguns and matchlocks. That way, it's in line with historical firearms, since they appeared about the same time as early plate armor types, coat of plates and later brigandine. If your setting is more European high medieval era technology, breastplates, plate armor, jousting, etc., matchlocks would be appropriate. Have magic create a byproduct that makes gunpowder react violently. Now, for example, let's say someone creates a fireball. What if the magic conjures up not only the kinetic energy needed for heat, but the process also introduces a burst of oxygen as well as to fuel it in a controlled explosion upon impact? But the oxygen is created in like a cloud all around the area, including the oxidizer in the ammunition. The added oxygen would dissipate in the open naturally, but inside the bullet casing or chamber, it wouldn't have a way of escaping. This would make muzzle flash blindingly bright and the explosion in the chamber less controlled. This wouldn't be a problem for single-fire bolt-action weapons or revolvers, but rapid-fire weapons would either be too hard to control or even potentially explosive. It'd be like the ammunition would be constantly having its chemical composition changed whenever someone cast a spell nearby that would make certain technologies totally unfeasible and left to magic to fill the void instead, since the very nature of magic would constantly be affecting the environment around it. Actually, if you think about it more, in a world where spells are commonplace, guns would be more dangerous to the person carrying it than anyone else. It'd be like having a grenade on you, but everyone else is holding the pin, since it'd be really simple to make a spell that just discharges all the ammo in a weapon at once. If you see someone holding a gun, cast Spark, and make every bullet in the magazine explode simultaneously, taking out the would-be shooter and anyone standing near him. The only solution would be to have magically resistant bullets, which would be probably really difficult to produce and again would limit magazine capacity to 6 shots at most. And even then, powerful magicians could still turn the bullets against their users. I'm a gun nut, IRL. But I do not like to mix my D&D with guns of any variety. Maybe it's because I'm a gun nut that it just seems boring. You really need to carefully consider availability. Magic might be the more elegant solution, but if it requires a wizard to use when wizards might be only 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 people, that's not very useful when you can give a musket to anyone with 2 arms. This gets even more pronounced the more magic it takes. Sending spells that can transmit over hundreds of miles, for example, require very high-level casters. A telegraph might not be as good, but it can be used by someone with no magical ability at all. It's like how firearms outcompeted longbows well before there was a firearm that could match the range, accuracy, and armor-penetrating ability of an English longbow. Magic only prevents tech from being developed if magic is cheap and commonplace. The same argument could be made for why did everyone carry spears back in the day? Well, they were known as the peasant's weapon, easy to make and commonplace, and anyone could just pick it up, brace themselves, and use one. A machine gun might have more moving parts than a musket, but they both follow the same laws of physics. If an advanced firearm doesn't work, there's no real justification for a more primitive one doing so. Unless you've got something like the Forgotten Realms where there is a deity, Gond, who keeps it that way. Here's one point to consider. If magic always existed, then things like firearms may not have been developed. There are also a lot of other factors, like economic and political mostly, on why certain technologies don't get developed. If the ruling class were wizards, a practice which is controlled and takes a lot of study, it is reasonable at that point they might be wary of something anyone can use easily: guns. Therefore, they outlaw firearms or control the flow of explosives. This would be similar to how the Roman Catholic Church excommunicated the crossbow. Another option is simply that magic is so helpful and useful that people don't find another way to do things. Why invent a washing machine when someone with little effort can mutter a few words and clean your clothes? Think prestidigitation. If magic has recently appeared or returned, then that is a whole different question. Historically, full, articulated sets of plate armor, the ones common to fantasy RPG settings, existed alongside matchlock and wheel-lock firearms. It is perfectly reasonable to have black powder weapons in such settings. Warhammer Fantasy mixes sword and sorcery with black powder pretty seamlessly, for example. So, unless you are specifically aiming to have a setting based on an earlier period, guns are pretty much fine. I have never understood why guns and magic have to be separated in a fantasy setting. Oh, Bob can throw out a fireball that destroys or damages a large portion of our enemies. Well, maybe I could throw out a stick of compressed powder that once lit does the same thing without all the study and practice of the things he's practiced over the years. It's a pretty common thought that my or our enemy has that. Why can't I or we have that as well? It's the common source of real-world innovation. And I thought D&D had grown out of the get guns out of my swords and sorcery game phase. I understand that this hobby was heavily inspired by Lord of the Rings, but the game has progressed so much since then. Just look at all the diverse settings that are playable in 5th edition. Eberron, which is modeled after a fantasy version of the fallout of the world wars of the 20th century. Ravinka, which is probably the most high-tech setting in D&D history. Theros, the you won't believe it's not Greece setting. That's so good. And Dark Sun, the psionic bug and slave-filled Tatooine setting. And many others. Hell, the Artificer is now one of the 13 official 5th edition classes, which also says a lot about the severe lack of classes in 5th edition, and it's super popular, and mentions them being proficient in firearms at the DM's permission. Yes, it's optional, but it's there. Now, if the game has progressed far enough from the original version of D&D that you can play a psychic white-haired human that is melded with a spectral worm crab that can shoot people with mind lasers and start their own colony of thralls. I think that it's progressed far enough to have firearms in D&D and no longer be such an anomaly. So, my answer is yes. Guns! There are balance issues with the weapons, sure, but if restricted enough and used in moderation, firearms are a perfectly fine and valid addition to almost any D&D campaign. You know, here's a hot take. Crossbows stats already work perfectly well for firearms, a result of them being an absolutely awful model of real crossbows. But let's be real, who wants a weapon that takes 5 turns to reload? Warhammer Fantasy is full of characters and archetypes that use guns. A gun is one of the witch hunter's main weapons, for instance. As far as 40k goes, I know 2 real fanatics about it, totally into the game and lore, and they both have full armies of pretty much every available option. With the new rules that just came out, they have completely turned their back on it and went to fantasy, or other tactile miniature war games. I'm in the no guns camp now, since we now have repeating longbows, but I've allowed my characters to R&D it over the course of an in-game year for a simple musket rifle or hand cannon. Big boom, but you could blow yourself up if you get it wrong. I have a specific and only sorta reasonable take on this. I think guns should exist, but be distinctly the weapon of pirates and sailors. Where land dwellers have easy access to trees and branches to make arrows and bows, sailors have no such luxury, and ammunition requiring finite resources and high-quality crafting is simply not viable at sea, especially when you're more likely to lose those arrows in the sea, whether you're firing at a distant ship or a boarding crew. Black powder guns, though, you just need a barrel of the stuff and some shit vaguely projectile-shaped. In my world, guns can be loaded with just about anything. Seashells, rocks, earrings, teeth, you name it. There's specialized ammunition, of course, but it's costly. The equivalent of magic arrows. It travels farther and does more damage. For the most part, though, you only need short-range damage with a black powder pistol. The players can use whatever they like, of course, but in the setting, firearms are very expensive weapons, and with very, very cheap ammo that could be used by anybody and can be scrounged up by any single person out there. Whereas bows are affordable weapons that require expertly crafted ammunition that, of course, while it's bountiful on land, is near impossible to make at sea. Hey everybody, Brian Von VA checking in after the vid. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, ring that bell, and let us know down in the comments below. Do you think that firearms and guns in general belong in the settings of D&D? Anything to do with black powder weapons or flintlock weapons, do they belong? Are they in your campaign? And how did you balance them? We love you all. See you next time. Bye for now.